This is a great time for us to get started. I know we've got a good group here. We've got a few more who are continuing to join us and probably will over the course of the call, as we've seen in previous calls as well. We also have a number of people following us on Facebook Live. And so Rob is going to be feeding us questions that may show up from there as well. And I'll tell you, we've been getting actually great follow-up pick up on Facebook as well afterwards. People are continuing to come to view the videos and the conversation. So we're thrilled that each of you are here today. My name's Trevor Munven from Rhapsody Strategies, and this is the 8th in our series of community calls around helping organizations through their response and recovery from COVID-19. We know this is not a short-term event. This has been continuing over some time. I am now at day 38. Home with my children, who I adore, but I am looking forward to this being lifted. And I think they're starting to as well. So, I think that flows both ways. I'm thrilled to be joined today with the team from Rhapsody and our special guests as well, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Let me just point out, and maybe with a wave you can help connect us. Catherine Fair from Rhapsody. Catherine, give us a wave. Thank you. Kathy Lumsden, as well as here. Steve Osmond from Calgary. Steve, give us a wave as well. And as always, I'm joined by my partners here as well, Rob Dale and Eric Deschamps. Eric's going to be helping as well through this. Rob is going to be managing the Facebook side. Eric has got the conversation here in our Zoom call. And we're really very excited to have with us a good friend of mine, Cabby. You'll see his name tag says Satyamoorthy Kabalan. He is decided. See, I have an F in the middle of my name, which makes it a little tricky sometimes for people to pronounce my name. It's still pronounced like a V. I'll just make that easy. Cabby has a Satyamoorthy Kabalan in the middle of his name, which also seems to trip up people every once in a while. So he said, go by Cabby. Cabby, I'm thrilled that you're here today. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome, Trevor.
So Cabby is with the Gartner Group right now. We shared over time a common role over time, not in the same moment, as we were both directors of national security and public safety at the Conference Board of Canada. Cabby is a very accomplished individual. He is someone I respect deeply, someone I've spent a lot of time with, someone I've traveled with, spoken with, presented with. And, this is a guy who advises senior leaders on everything from technology and policy to public safety and emergency management, who's an entrepreneur, who has a PhD in biotech. Have I got that right? Am I close? Biochemistry?
Yeah, it's biotech.
Okay, so I had it from a not bad university. It was Cambridge, I think. The Cabby was also the advisor on the Futures program for the British Home Office to forecast into the future. So he is such a great guy when you want to start to look forward to say what's going to happen next. And so we're thrilled to have him here today to have some conversation to think about how do we go about strengthening our organizations through this recovery process, and to bring the thinking of emergency management, where we have an entire domain, an entire field focused on going through as successfully as possible what we're going through right now. So I'm very, very excited about this conversation. It's near and dear to my heart as well. I want to encourage you over the course of this conversation to throw your questions into chat, whether it's on the Zoom call or on Facebook Live. We'll make sure those questions come to Cabby as we go through this as well. Or for those of you who are here with us live, if you need to wave furiously or jump in, feel free. We want to hear your voices and your questions as we start to work through things here a little bit. I'd like to frame this just quickly by talking about where we find ourselves right now, right? There are some who are still in the response phase, but if we think about response and recovery, and then if I add a third R to that list, and Cabby, you'll know it's a word I love, but it's resilience. To think about what's our capacity to recover here, and what's the nature of that recovery as well. We're moving out of kind of initial response into recovery. We're moving out of that initial shock and pain and, oh my God, what's happened here? And it did happen very quickly, into a phase where we're looking to say, how do we start to recover? And we're starting to get the most slight positive signals starting to come to us, saying, okay, we may be through the worst. There may be a bit of an echo effect here as well, but we're working our way through this. And to start to look and say, what does it mean for us to recover? What does this look like? And I'd actually like to share 2 slides with you here. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. And it's going to be, potentially the most boring looking slide you have ever seen before. So let me get rid of that. Everybody see, Eric, can you see this okay? I can see your face, so all good. So what you see here is based on some research that was done at another school, not quite as good as Cambridge. I think they called it Oxford. Did some research on the capacity of organizations to recover and the impact on on cash, basically, on the performance of the organization. And what you'll see is a line across the middle, which is 0. That was the baseline. And across the bottom are the trading days. So this is a response of what happened to the stock of these companies when they hit a disaster. And there's about 15 different scenarios in there over a period of time. And what you see very obviously is a big drop right away, right? Over about the first week or so, and then a gradual recovery over time. And, within about 2.5 months, the numbers start to pick up, and actually we're above overall. And then they do a little bit of a dance here. So we look and we say, okay, events happen. Companies have an impact. We all have a negative impact that plays out here a little bit. There's going to be that dip where everyone goes, oh my God, what just happened? But then this recovery comes and we see this typical kind of window. But what this chart doesn't tell you is that there's 2 different scenarios that are actually playing out at the same time. So let me take you through the second image here, which talks about 2 different groups, and they categorize them as the recoverers and the non-recoverers. Now, I'm not going to give them any bonus points for the categories in terms of how they labeled them because they're terrible names. But it's very easy in this picture to pick out the recoverers and the non-recoverers. So about half of them, not only did they go down, they went down about 10%. They lost 10% of the value of their organization, and it stayed down there. And in fact, got lower in some points to as much as 15% of the value of the company over 100 days, 200 days. This is a long period of time, okay? The second trajectory we see is a dip down to 5, maybe 6 points here, but within 30 days, they've come back over, and in fact, some have picked up as much as 15% of the value of their company. So what this is, and it's great with public companies because it is the representation of the confidence of the public and the ownership to say, how is the leadership of this organization doing when it comes to leading this response? Now, either of these you can say, well, I know which group I want to be in and which one I don't want to be in. The question is, what are the behaviors that define the one group from the other? And I think that's where I want to land part of our conversation today, is to say, we're in this recovery phase and we're looking forward to say, how do we make sure we're above that line and we're these top performers? Because they face similar kinds of events. What's really interesting is if 2 of those organizations are competitors. Because one went down 15, one went up 15. That's a 30% advantage in terms of the value of your organization, which is massive. So if in this context, we're leading our way through it, the quality of our leadership and how we start to progress and work our way through this period of time is absolutely critical. So I wanted to raise that to your attention because this isn't just hyperbole and talk about the nature of leadership and it will make things better. This is documented. This is clearly factually documented and understood that the performance and the response of our leadership is going to drive our future performance going forward. So the choices we make right now are absolutely critical. And part of the reason I'm so happy you're here, Cabby, is because you have spent a great deal of time in your life advising leaders through these moments, in advance of these moments, sometimes after these moments as well, to help guide them through this in order to help shape their future as well. So maybe just with that as a bit of a frame, Cabby, I can give you a couple of minutes just to respond to that and maybe share a couple of your thoughts. And then I know I've got questions for you. I think others are going to have questions for you as well. So why don't we get some of your thoughts here?
So I think the two most important words, well, first of all, Trevor, thank you very much for that introduction. The $50 note will be in the post later. Um, you used two of the most important words when it comes to dealing with a crisis: leadership and recovery. And these are actually almost two magical ingredients in terms of seeing those, as you call it, the recoverers. I like to call them the resilient versus the non-resilient. And the difference is this. So first, in the recovery piece, I'm also glad to hear you say several times, that people are entering the recovery phase. One of the key issues that we've seen in the past is the old model for dealing with a crisis is, let's fight the fire, let's focus on what's immediately in front of us. That's your response phase, sometimes called the hero phase. You wait for that to end, and then you go, okay, things have calmed down, the crisis in front of me has died down, I can now think about recovery. That doesn't really work in this world today, and you will find that those who are in that recoverer, or as I call it, resilient category, are the ones who actually start not only thinking about, but implementing recovery as they're responding. There are things you can think about right as the crisis is happening, which will actually help set you up for recovery. Vice Admiral Neffinger, who's retired from the US Coast Guard, has this famous saying, I think you've heard it before, Trevor. Think about how you're going to turn things on as you're turning them off. So as you're responding to the crisis, you have to consider, what are the long-term implications of the actions you're taking today? You're already thinking about recovery. So I think that's the first and most important piece. If you're not in recovery now, you actually are. You should be thinking about it, and you should be acting on it. The second piece you mentioned, which I think is absolutely key, is leadership. I've seen time and time again, middle of the road plans, sometimes slightly poor, actually get pulled together, taken through, and help the organization survive and thrive because of good leadership. I've also seen the best written plans with the shiny gold plates on top of them and all the bells and whistles you can think of completely fall apart in the midst of crisis because of leadership. We have to realize that in the midst of crisis, things are going to change. And to be able to navigate the changes, you need leadership from top to bottom, not just at the very peak of your organizations, but almost at every level, because people are going to have to make decisions on the go. They can't stop and wait, oh, you know what, we should check with Rob and then Eric and then Trevor, get it all signed off and come back. It's too late. The situation's already evolved. So you need good leadership at every level in the organization to be able to weather any crisis. So I think those are two key words as we think about how our organizations can get into that, as Oxford put it, recovery. I think resilient category would be my choice. For us to fit into that, I think those are two key ingredients: recovery, early and during response, and leadership from top to bottom of the organization.
You mentioned thinking about how to turn things back on as while you're turning them off. It's very interesting because sometimes people will confuse the two because the sequence is different. I remember when we were down doing some work around the oil rigs through Texas and the oil refineries, to say when there is a major disaster coming in, you can shut them down very quickly. But it takes something like 28 days to turn them back on, right? So you can shut them off with a switch, but to turn them back on, to get things to reinitiate, is not the same. It's not just throwing the switch the other way. And I think the light switch has ruined us, in terms of that. It's led us to believe turning it back on is as easy as turning it off. And so thinking that through, and I know I was on a call with a leader today in their organization, and we were literally talking about what is the sequence by which you reactivate your services. They were fully shut down. It's like, which one's first? Because the order really, really matters. And I think there is in this temporal piece where we're thinking both about what is the order in which we do things, and then how fast can we get them done, right? That speed. So
if I could add to that, Trevor, it's not just the order and the sequencing. It's actually consciously thinking about, if I am turning this on or off at this point, when I come back to my normal, whether it's a new normal, whether it's the old normal, what does that mean? It's actually making that conscious decision and taking that thought through in terms of what does this mean for the long term when I decide to flip the switch on or off. That's, I think, the bigger challenge. The sequencing can be worked out. There are plans for that. There are ways to work out that complexity. But if you don't consider the long-term implications when you're taking that, that quick flick of the switch on or off, that's when you struggle. That's when, even when you get the sequencing right, because you haven't thought about it in advance, you're not set up to get back up to normal or back up to speed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's, there's an expression we really love. I like to use it all the time, which is it's so critical to keep one foot firmly planted in the present and one firmly planted in the future. And I think that's the dichotomy of leadership, is our capacity to be able to hold both of those, the chaos of the present and the uncertainty of the future. Within there lies a lot of courage and wisdom and judgment. Where would you, I guess, I have a question here for you, which is, what's the guidance you give to leaders on what that means to have a foot in both parts and what they should be focused on right now?
Well, I think the best guidance I've seen on this comes from, I think, Trevor, Eric McNulty as well at Harvard, at the NPLI in Harvard. He talks a lot about this whole issue around getting out of the basement. And Trevor, you've used it sometimes in terms of how we get tired and sink into that reptilian brain. That's when we're very much action focused, when we're very much driven by stress and the immediate, we work ourselves out of the gray matter. It becomes too tired and we slip into the reptilian brain. We're reacting. We're not processing. What Eric used to say was the most useful thing you can do as a leader is to recognize that you need to step out, you need to take a break, you need to be able to see the bigger picture. You being able to function at a higher level and not just reacting is absolutely essential. Eric himself used to play the role of almost a coach who would sit in some of these major disasters, and he would be the trusted advisor who would tap someone on the shoulder and say, look, you've been at this for X number of hours, maybe you need a break. That will help. So for leaders to be able to keep that one foot in the immediate and the one foot in the future, the first thing they need is space. And that's the mental space to be able to step back and look at the entire situation. So having a trusted advisor in there, whether it's a member of the team, whether it's an external, but the person whom you can trust, whom if they tap you on the shoulder and say, you need to take a break, you need a little time out, you listen to them. I will tell you that this is possibly the hardest thing to do as a leader in the midst of a crisis. I have not seen or met a single leader who's managed to do this seamlessly. Everyone struggles with this, but this is an absolute necessity.
Where do you think the struggle comes from, or what could they do to, as they step into the next one, to minimize that struggle, Gabby?
Struggle comes from a natural place in all of us. We sometimes call it the hero factor or the hero syndrome, when everything's falling apart, particularly if you're a first responder. And Trevor, we've had long discussions about this. You're the one who runs in to the fire. You're the one who runs into the shooting. You're the one who tries to save lives. You're the paramedic who's in there, trying to stop the bleeding. The same happens with leaders in a major emergency. It's your organization. It's your people. Your first instinct is, how do I stop this? What can I do to prevent my organization from falling apart, my people falling apart? And so you take on everything. So it actually comes, in a sense, from a good place, which actually makes it even harder to deal with. So first, of course, there is almost that internal realization in terms of you as a person, that self-awareness, that even as a leader, you need to be able to step back. You need to know your limits. And self-awareness is actually a rare thing. Again, it's one of those aspects that leaders struggle with all of the time. But Eric likes to use the shortcut, which is if you don't have the self-awareness, have that awareness external to you. Have those trusted people, and they can even be someone who's got a parallel position to you who may not be directly involved in dealing with a crisis, who can actually tap you on the shoulder and say, Trevor, I think you need a break. I think you need to step away for a little while, reset, and come back to this. So if you're a leader, I think that's the two things. Developing the self-awareness certainly is, it's recommended from so many perspectives. That's a very useful piece in your leadership toolkit. But that is a challenge. That is very difficult, and also very difficult to hold on to in a crisis. So the second part of that, in terms of having whoever that might be in that trusted voice that you might have in your team that's responding to an incident, whether they're there virtually or whether they're there physically, having that trusted individual who can tap you on the shoulder, or set of individuals, and say, you need to take a break and step back for a moment. That would be the shortcut I would use.
Mm. I think that's great advice. I think that's great advice. The notion of, and I know it was a thought certainly we threw out early on, was this is the time to bring your advisors close, to have their guidance and their perspective, because it's also a demanding exercise, right? So if we're 38 days home, for me anyway, for others a little shorter, a little longer, but in that category, that's a long period of time. And we're not done yet. And so there's an endurance element to this, which is absolutely critical. And I think those external advisors help keep our head above water over the long term. We can sustain anything for a short period of time. It's the endurance that goes with it to continue to lead, to continue to choose, to continue to kind of raise our self-awareness through this.
There's another, Trevor, if I could add one other thing, there's another important aspect to this, which we should not forget. Having one foot in the present in terms of dealing with the crisis in front of you is important. Having one foot in the future, of course, in terms of the long term, but that foot in the future, I don't quite describe it as a foot in the future as I describe it as the ability to view what's happening around you. So that's both in terms of the long term, but also in terms of the circumstances that might be occurring around you. The tragic events we just witnessed in Nova Scotia, the wildfires that we're already seeing in Squamish, British Columbia, all of the other issues that we have to deal with as organizations don't go away just because we have a pandemic. So again, as a leader, if both feet are planted in the crisis, you're going to be hit sideways by something else that comes in. And it might even be something minor, which actually your organization's very much dealt with before. It's very easy, but it could completely knock you over. So that 2-foot description, I normally say that second foot, it's more around the breadth of what's going around you out into the future, but also in terms of all of the other issues that you may have to deal with on a regular basis that haven't gone away.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the recent events in Nova Scotia, some of the other crises that are in some cases literally burning. We know we're in flooding season here in Ottawa as well, so we'll see what happens there. It doesn't look like it's been as bad as it has been in other years. And Debbie's asked a question here, and I think it touches on it. I think you've answered part of it around concurrent events. Right. Yeah. And I know this is a challenge when you're constructing exercises. Michael, you and I have had some conversation about this as well. There's a certain point where you can keep introducing externalities to keep pushing your team as they practice and train and prepare. But at a certain point, they go, come on, that's not really going to happen. If you have a point where aliens land in the middle of your exercise, they go, come on, is this ever really going to happen? However, here we are. And we're seeing, in the midst of this pandemic, we see this tragic shooting in Nova Scotia. We see flood risk here. We see fires playing out. We're going to continue to see all of the other things at the same time. What is it we can draw on in order to manage the concurrent risks and not to become, blinded by one single event that's playing out as well?
Well, just stepping back to what you mentioned just now around exercises, Trevor, and I think that's one thing that we also need to realize. Too often, we exercise to success. Craig Fugate, who's the former head of FEMA, likes to put it that you need to exercise to failure, not to success. And concurrent events are a great way to make you exercise to failure. Because what you learn when you exercise to failure is where the weak points are in your approach and in your organization. Will you be able to fix all of them? Probably not. But you know where they are. You know where, if you need reinforcements, where they're going to be needed. If you need to call for help, where's the best place that help can come in to actually assist your organization to survive the crisis and get through it. And that's the other problem. People don't like thinking about concurrent threats or concurrent issues because it does lead to exercise to failure. We're not comfortable with exercise to failure. And I would argue, just like Craig, that should be our norm, not exercise to success.
Right, right. Mike, I think you were about to speak a little bit earlier. Did you have a thought that was linked to what we were chatting about there around exercises?
I know. Well, we can certainly relate because what we lived through last year, and that's I agree, Cabby, 100%. Exercise to failure because you're not learning anything if you don't. Something that's just in the back of my mind though is as we're dealing with this, when we exercise, it's always all the focus is on the event, but we're all finding ourselves now trying to deal with an event and trying to deal with the home life as well, and things we're not familiar with. We're all in different environments, and if there's children involved at home or you have elderly parents, you're worried about them. You have all these other distractions, and they're real legitimate distractions, and you're trying to deal with your business or your organization, and so you're pulled in a number of different directions. There's no rest. You can go home, or if you're working from home, you don't have the rest that you would normally have if you pulled yourself out of the front line. So it does wear people down, and we're starting to see that. People, you're absolutely right. You have to take some time out, or else you will burn out.
Well,
absolutely.
Interestingly, one of the analysts whom I work with at Gartner, her name's Christy Struckman. I think she's got a free webinar up that she did on LinkedIn. It's about leading your teams through the emotional side of COVID-19. And it goes to that point, Mike. It's our people actually face a lot of challenges in terms of this particular situation. And, I think I see with many of us, well, some of us, I see Kathy, you're in the kitchen. Not all of us have dedicated space where we might be able to sit down and work. That doesn't help. The ability to focus and do things. And as we know with bandwidth, if you have 3 people in the home working, or even just 2 working and 3 kids, some of whom might be using the internet even for a school Zoom session, it gets disruptive. A big piece, Kathy certainly has mentioned this. One of my former professors at the London Business School, Linda Grattan, who does a lot of research on the future of work, has mentioned this several times about these challenges and about us understanding that interface, particularly when we talk about remote working and people working from home. First of all, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody has a unique set of circumstances in their home life. It does not work. I know we've been lauding remote work, but it does not work for everybody. Some of us require that social connection and require it on a regular basis to function. So as we start thinking about the challenges of how our folks are dealing with this, and even us as leaders, and Mike, it's a great point that you raised, we have to recognize that function of being at home and working remotely adds a new layer of complexity. And perhaps the old rules in terms of how we deal with people and what we expect are changing. I can tell you that with my colleagues and myself, because we work with leaders from across Canada and into the US, seeing the cat, the dog, the kids, the wife, in fact, one of them in an unfinished attic because that was the only space he could work in. It's not unusual. No one takes offense at this. No one judges this. This is our new norm. These are some of the things that we need to consider as we start thinking about how we treat our folks, what they may be feeling in terms of pressure, what they might be feeling in terms of stress. Because it is, Mike, I think you're absolutely right, very different to many of the other crises we've been through before.
Well, and I think, Cabby, you talk about the how work is changing and the challenge for business owners and business leaders as they navigate through this. And there's the event, there's also everything else. There's the entire organization to keep running, to keep sustained as we work our way through. You're also a guy who's run business, got a few patents to your name. I think there's 6 or 7 in there. You know what it's like to launch a company, to build a company, right? You've sat in our shoes as well as business owners and business leaders. Let's bring it right down to the ground here in terms of guidance that you would offer those who are running small or medium-sized businesses through this. Because you know what, we're not running exercises. Yep. We might have a health and safety person or a first aid kit, maybe a Band-Aid. We look at these things very differently. And so we're not in that situation where we've got a full resilience plan and a BCP plan and all of those kinds of things, and less experience in terms of dealing with them. We don't have that specialized expertise in our organization. What do we do then? What's the guidance that you would offer to say right here, right now? Because you got a group of business leaders here as well, and you've been one as well, so I know you get it. Where would you be encouraging them to put their focus within their organization? So beyond the leadership kind of element, that pragmatic, I need to make sure I'm putting energy in these places. What guidance would you offer?
So the first thing I would do in any business, the very first thing, regardless of whether you're large or small, is ask the people question. The challenge with most of our business is, okay, we might be technology enabled, we might even be designing, developing, deploying technology, but it's people at the day that make it happen. Even if you're running a call center, which is all technology based, it's people answering the calls at the end of the day. Or if you've got a chatbot, somebody's got to train the chatbot and maintain the chatbot. People should come first. If you think about that, particularly in terms of how your organizations are then going to survive into the future, it's always going to be a people question. Even if you have to go down the route of letting people go, you have to think about how you do it and make sure you do it in the right way. That's always going to be painful, but it's worth considering right from the get-go. Because at the end of the day, people are what make your organization work. How you treat them is going to either help set you up to survive and get out through this, or it's going to completely bury you. I can tell you that from a larger company perspective, Gartner did a survey of global chief financial officers, and we found that over 80% of them were actually intending to pay something to even their hourly employees who were disrupted by COVID-19. That's the value of people, and I think a lot of organizations starting to see it. So first and foremost, think about your people. How are they doing? Making sure that they're still there as a resource, and even if you have to take the unfortunate step of letting people go, making sure you do it in the right way. Married to that, that's an external facing view. You have to think about yourself. One of the things that leaders do very, very poorly in an emergency, going back again to the example I mentioned earlier about not stepping out and realizing that you as the leader might be burning out, is they don't take care of themselves. So they might think about the mental health of their staff, they might think of the mental health and the stresses their clients are facing, but they don't often do the self-reflection that allows them to see what challenges they might face. So number one, as a business, think about people and do it in two ways, both in terms of the people in your organization, but also in terms of yourself. So if you don't function, the organization doesn't function. The second thing is, in terms of any business, I'm glad you mentioned again that magic word, recovery. Even if you're in the middle of fighting fires, you've got to be thinking about recovery now. What do things look like the moment everything calms down, the moment we're told, if you're a storefront, that you can now have, 5 people per 20 square foot or whatever it might be in your store. Are you ready for that? What does that mean? Do you have stocks? How does that play out? So the recovery piece and starting to ask those questions of what does that look like going down the line, that needs to be part of your thinking right now. Going back to what Vice Admiral Neffinger said, you've got to be thinking about things, thinking about how you turn things back on as you turn them off. So you shut down that store or shut down that storefront, what happens when you have to bring it back online? I think if we start considering that further, the other thing that organizations should do is, we're all talking about what the new normal might be. Is the world going to change significantly around us? I certainly think there are going to be some changes. What those changes are and how deep they go, I think that's where there's a lot of debate, but it is going to change. Here's your opportunity. Regardless of the size of the business, you've now been hit by a major event. This is a good time to ask 2 questions. Question 1, what is it that I'm doing now that's actually faster and better than what I used to do? Basically, during this period, if you're trying to keep going, you will find new ways of doing things, some of which are going to be a heck of a lot better than how you did them before. Mm-hmm. Now you've got efficiency drivers, which are going to be really important in terms of letting your company and your organization take off. Make sure you cement those in place. Make sure people can't go back to the old ways of doing things. Put those new practices in place. The second bucket, as we start thinking forward, is You know what? That thing I used to do every Wednesday for 2 hours because it was the best. I was told by somebody it was the best thing for my business. I haven't been doing it for a month, and you know what? My business is still going. Nothing's changed. What are the things that you've been doing which really have little or no return for your business? You're going to discover a whole bunch of those. Because during the crisis, there are things you're going to have to drop. So what if those are actually critical to your business and what aren't? Now, if you answer those two questions, you're coming out leaner, more efficient, and faster than you were before. Even before we start thinking about what might change in the world and whether you've got to pivot your organization, you're already setting yourself up to come out better than you were before. There could be lots of other changes, and I think the final thing I will say is, as a business, is you do have to monitor your environment. Our preferences, particularly if you are consumer-facing, our preferences in that area changing as a result of what we've seen with COVID-19. What might those be? What might be the impact on my business? That starts getting a little bit more nebulous. You can go into scenarios, etc., but you do need to keep an eye on those. But if you keep an eye on those two questions I just mentioned, that's a guarantee that you'll come out operating better than when you went in.
Oh, fantastic, Cabby. And Ken, I see your hand up there, and just I'll just transition here just for a second, because there's such an important point. I just want to emphasize it, Cabby. It's this notion that, we say, well, we're all in business and we're all competitive and we're all looking for efficiencies. But there are moments that truly drive our competitiveness and truly drive our efficiencies, where we look at everything going, do we actually have to do that?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, organizations are doing that everywhere right now, saying what is truly essential, what is truly fundamental, what are our must-haves in terms of this business, and not in a way that sacrifices service or the experience for the customer. And in fact, maybe even enhances it. But it's that kickstart that's been required in order to drive things forward. And some organizations will have that more or less in their DNA on a regular kind of day. Moments and events like this are going to be ones that really drive that behavior and push it. So I so appreciate you raising that. I think it's a very, very important one. Ken, you've got a thought here.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to look at the video afterwards to see the exchanges and the expressions on my face when I first raised the hand. Then we're off the point, then we came back to it, we're off again, but I thought I'd make the point anyways. Cabby, and it was Mike who had talked earlier about self-care and that sort of stuff, and I wanted to comment that I'd seen an article in the news about hospital visits being down in emergency significantly. People are showing up at the last minute. Even the Heart Institute is seeing a 40% reduction in people showing up because people don't want to go out, they're afraid to go out. Linking it back to what we're talking about, the whole self-care thing. And I like the idea, Cabby, you're talking about having that trusted advisor when you're running an exercise or you're in a real world scenario. And then also as a business leader, tapping your employees on the shoulder to say, you might want to go and tend to whatever that issue is, and someone doing that for yourself as well. So I know this is a couple minutes behind in this, but I thought I just wanted to throw it out there.
No, it's
Thanks.
a great point. It's that issue around around the emergency visits to hospitals. So my brother-in-law's partner happens to be an ER nurse, and she has told us, we do our family Zoom chats on a regular basis, and she said, never in my career have I seen only true emergencies in the hospital. So suddenly we're deciding, even automatically ourselves, what is truly important. Don't get me wrong, there might be some people who decide not to go and should go, but for the most part, people are only showing up if they actually have to. What I hope that does come out of this is hopefully in the medical profession, we get a chance to then educate people, well, if you didn't need to come in then, you still don't need to come in now that we're back to new normal. Here's an opportunity to change the pressures we see on our emergency rooms.
That's incredible to me. That for the first time they're seeing just true emergencies come in. That is a real shift in behavior, especially when so many other options are actually not available right now for people to use. So that is quite something. That is quite something. So when we talk about resilience, Cabby, this notion of We talk about recovery, bouncing back, return to normal. This notion of resilience is, why would we just want to bounce back? How do we bounce back stronger? And so I'd love to get your thoughts and your insights, again, with a focus to help business leaders as they're looking at this, saying, okay, yes, I want to get back where the business is running again. I get maybe some things are going to be different, and will be more Zoom calls and less meetings and a few other things. And, everyone will, I don't know, flee trains and rush to the airport, Mike. They'll, all of those, we'll see what behaviors start to play out. They want to see things come back. But how do we come back stronger? What is it? What guidance or what questions would you give them to help them say, as I'm planning my recovery in my organization, or as we're doing it, what do we stay focused on? And you've given us a couple of good questions to work with. What else would you suggest here?
So I think the first point is around that, that opportunity for change. I talked about finding the things that are now giving you efficiencies, getting rid of the things that don't really add much to your business and that you've dropped and haven't made a difference. All of this gives you a bit more room and a bit more flexibility in terms of the choices you can make. Certainly monitoring the environment to see how preferences are changing, what's going out there. You also have the opportunity, because of this prolonged time, you have the opportunity to embed behaviors. Let's say you went into this crisis, let's say you're a medium-sized company. You went into this crisis going, you know what, we really would love to get everyone able to work remotely. But, some people are still resistant for this and that reason, or we want people to stop using paper. Guess what? You have a chance to embed all of those behaviors. So the first thing about coming back better is ask the question, what were the things I was trying to do pre-crisis that would have made my organization better? And has this crisis and some of the changes it's pushed in given me the ability to launch that and embed that in the organization? So immediately you're coming out better than you were before. And some of these big changes, one large organization I work with, there's a lot of lawyers in there. You can imagine what happened when they proposed going to e-signatures, which would allow for remote working, make things a lot more efficient. The CIO there had a 2-year battle, and he could not see a way of winning it. He's won it in 5 days. They're all using e-signatures. No matter how the world changes after this is a huge efficiency gain for them. This allows for a lot of flexibility. This allows for speedier resolution of documents, speedier verification, speedier sign-off. It just changes the game. So you have a couple of opportunities, beyond just those efficiency savings. Look at what you were planning to do before. What can you leverage in terms of this crisis to launch that, embed that, in some cases, even finish that quicker? At Gartner, the big thing that we talk about at the moment is your opportunity for digital transformation. Because think about it this way, right? We've all talked about digital. There's a great cartoon out there of a board meeting and someone standing up and telling everybody, you know what, that digital thing, yeah, we can probably wait another 12 to 18 months before we really kick it off. And there's a wrecking ball called COVID-19 that's swinging towards the window. So there are things that you would have been planning already, and I think digital's a great one. We all know that's where the world's going. You've now got the excuse to build that, embed it, and launch it. Take full advantage of the change.
I think it's such good advice, because there's an element here. I think we've had some discussion before about how the future is moving forward very rapidly. Right. We talked about, we all know, there's an inevitability around e-signatures, right? Documents are moving that way, but now it's here because it has to be here. We all knew, online meetings would become more prevalent, but now we're being forced into it. Now we've talked about flexible workforce. People, well, yes, we have a world where we can do flexible, but not for you, not your role, not that. And now everyone suddenly seems to have figured it out. I mean, it's very impressive. And I think where there was resistance before, or outright refusal, there is such flexibility and openness right now for things to move forward. I think the example with the lawyers was a great one, where a 2-year battle has become a 5-day conversation. which is just extraordinary to say, what can we do and how do we embrace these, but then bring the future into the present. And maybe another element of that is look in your industry and say, what might a prognosticator look forward and say, in 5 years, in 10 years, here's what your industry will look like. And how much could you move that forward and bring it about today, right? Where could you take a stand right now?
And I think allied to that is the fact that when you've taken those stands, particularly in the midst of a crisis like this, I like to use the analogy of pushing water up the hill. If you're just trying to do that, it just flows back all the time. And the crisis might give you that extra run up, so you've got a whole bunch of water, a whole volume higher up than you ever did before, but it's just going to roll back the moment the crisis is done. So like pushing water up the hill, every now and then you want to put a dam in place. You want to make sure that people can't go back. So with electronic signatures, for example, most organizations have policies around, you need X, Y, and Z to have signed this piece of paper, and you need copies to be sent to. Just change that. You need X, Y, and Z to have given your electronic signature to the show. If you want to do paper, go ahead, but that's the requirement. Put the dams in place. Make sure the water doesn't flow back.
I love that. I love to put the dams in. We need a dam plan. I think that will take us a long way. It's interesting. I was, and I see your hand there, Ken. Don't worry. There was a CEO I was working with today. They've got their board meeting coming up, an annual meeting coming up, but their bylaws do not provide for them to meet virtually. And so they're now trying to figure out how to have the meeting to change the bylaws so they can have the meeting. And they're caught in this very interesting situation right now. And I tell you, they're hell bent on it now. They said, we are not going to stay stuck with this thing because our capacity actually to govern properly, to have the right fiduciary accountability and the right, generative strategic conversation are now limited because of a bylaw from an outdated period of time. And so I think the other thing for us to keep in mind here is there's a limited window of opportunity here as well. And that's what I like about your notion around put the dams in place, because when this subsides, yes, some things will change, but the resistances will reemerge. The pace will reemerge. There'll be a number of areas where the behaviors are going to snap right back to where they were. And there'll be somewhere there's lots of flexibility still left, but we don't want to risk the chance to say this opportunity that we could have had has been taken from us because we didn't act quickly enough or take advantage of that situation. So I think you've given us good guidance. Ken, you've been very patient there.
No worries. 1 point and 1 question. There's always somebody in an organization who thinks it's their job to say, no, we can't do it. I've met that person many times myself. I'm a recent retiree, and so the past number of weeks I've been spending lots of time on these calls, and this is wonderful to actually be able to invest in myself, right? Learning. So there's kind of a circuit of calls, these Rhapsody ones. I'm not saying it just because you guys are on the line here, but these are fantastic, and there's some that are not as great. And so some of the ones that are not as great, there's an awful lot of negativity in there, typically talking to businesses whose doors are shut. There's lots of good conversations about this being a great opportunity and you got to change the way you do business. I still see people hanging on to it, and I don't think it's my job to change that. But Gabby, is there any way that you can actually shake someone up to change that negativity, or just accept that they're the non-resilient and they're not going to be here?
Well, it's a challenge, and humans, for some reason, are very good when you open the negativity box. What looks like a 2x2 box turns into more like a 2,000 by 2,000 box. We can drag as much negativity as you like out of that box. When I run workshops and I ask people to look at the future, the first thing I ask them is, what are the positive aspects of this? What are the good things you get out of this particular future? Because if I ask them, what are the downsides, we're down a rabbit hole and we may never come back. A couple of things I will say about businesses that shutter. So, as Trevor mentioned, I've been an entrepreneur. I've been in the startup world. I know the pains of starting a business, and I know the pains of having to shut a business. And I will say this, it happens. I don't like to see that, but that is the truth of business. It happens. To anyone who's in that situation, the opportunity that's there is to learn what worked, what didn't, what can I do better the next time. The only constant that we like to say in emergency management is change. And the only way to cope with that is to be a constant learner. And it's the same in business. For those who are hit by some of these negative consequences, it's then having that time to reflect and ask the question, what could I have done something better? Could I have done something differently? And maybe, is this the type of business I want to be in? Is there something else that I should be doing that would give me that opportunity? I'm not sure that we'll always be able to change that tone of negativity, but I think if we start every conversation with, so what's the opportunity to come out of this? What can we do better as a result of this? As the opening salvo in any discussion we have about a crisis, I think you'll have a much, just psychologically, you'll have a much better conversation. If you start it with what went wrong, you will go down a rabbit hole. That's just human psychology, and we dive into that. So if you want to try and combat the negativity, that would be my suggestion. Start the question with, so what are the opportunities from this? What can we learn from this? How do we get better as a result of whatever we've experienced?
You know, it's such a challenge to that, Kavi, when the questions that we ask ourselves will determine the answers that we're going to get. Like how we're choosing, if the question that we're asking ourselves is, what's the opportunity here? We're going to answer that. If it's, why did this happen to me? We're going to answer that as well. And Rob, I see you there. Give me just a minute here for sure. I had a call kind of out of the blue yesterday from a couple who are in a business. They have another partner. The partner in COVID has panicked. They have taken all the money out of the business. They are looking to, they basically said, hey, you can buy me out if you want, or I'll buy you out. And by that, they mean, I'll take on the debt and you walk away. After 7 years, and this couple has been the ones that have been running it, operating the business. Wow. And they're heartbroken. They're absolutely heartbroken. And so they don't know what to do. They're trying to get back in there. They're trying to find a path. And they said, we're walking away with nothing. We'll have lost everything. Not a single thing. And I, as gently as I could, tried to interrupt them a little bit to say, let's actually talk about what you're leaving with. And let's actually talk about what you're also leaving behind, because this relationship and this partnership was not working. They said, we're going to have to build everything all over again. I said, yeah, but the person who's building it now is not the person who built it the first time. This is going to be a totally different experience. And the true value of this business, the rest is walls and, a few devices and a few other things in there. Those are all, to your point, around people earlier. These are all inert objects. The magic of this is you two and what you have done. In fact, the most valuable element of this business is walking out the door, and that's you two. And you're bringing every bit of opportunity with you. I said, is there an element here that's not fair? The answer is 100% yes. And we have to accept that as part of this situation. But are you done? No. There's so much to continue to go. So I just, you brought that to mind as you described how important it is for us to keep kind of thinking that way. Rob from Green Melon, let me give you a chance to share your thought or question, and then Kavi, a quick closing thought, and then folks, we're going to wrap it up so we'll be as close to 5 as possible. Rob, please, it's great to see you.
Thanks. I just wanted to reiterate, and you both touched on this, but I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and you should have done this when you started your business at some point, but to redo your SWOT analysis of your business and just add the caveat of during COVID. So what are my strengths during COVID? What are my weaknesses during COVID? What are my opportunities during COVID? And what are my threats during COVID? And really focus in on the opportunities in that. But you've got to really take that step back and say, okay, what's my new raison d'etre, basically? But it's just going through that SWOT analysis and reminding yourself, because your old one doesn't really exist right now.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea because, and especially if you have an old one, to contrast how you are in these two situations and see which strengths are common in both situations. To me, that will be quite revealing, that's for sure. And Eric, thank you for sharing the SWOT worksheet there as well. We've created one, Rob, that specific to this as well, where when we look at strengths and weaknesses in particular, they're segmented by the strengths of the leader, the team, and the organization. And same with the weaknesses for the leader, the team, and the organization. So we can start to get a more nuanced perspective there. And yes, it's safe to chat, to click on that one. Go for it, everybody. Rob, thanks so much for that. I think that's a great reminder. Cabby, maybe just a couple of final thoughts for us to keep in mind as we're continuing to head through our recovery and resilience phase. What should we be hanging on to here?
So we've talked about a number of things, and I think, we started this discussion around leadership. And when we think about leadership and how that needs to permeate an organization, not just with ourselves, but with everyone that goes in an organization. When we talk about resilience, a resilient organization is able to make decisions on the fly, on the spot, in the midst of a crisis. To be able to do that, to truly be able to do that, that means you have leaders at every level. People who are able to, given their guide rails, start working on things and taking on responsibility and making decisions. In the IT world, we talk about agile quite a bit, and we talk about product management quite a bit. All of those tools ultimately boil down to providing people with the guide rails and telling them, go forth, make this happen. All of these tools, that's what they boil down to. And that's what is at the core of your resilience. Good people who are able to act because you've given them the ability, the tools, and the responsibility to be leaders in your organization. I think that's absolutely critical for resilience. Obviously, us taking both the broad view and the long view, making sure we don't lose sight of everything else that normally happens around us in the midst of a crisis, and that we're also thinking about what happens next. We need to be thinking about recovery now, even in the middle of the response phase. So as leaders, again, taking that breadth and depth of view is absolutely important. But I think the last point that we've been really talking about is probably the critical one. What are the opportunities to come out of this? I don't want to use the old, crisis and opportunity saying, because, there's been some tragic events that have come on the back of what's happened. If we just look at the number of deaths globally, that is very, very significant. But it is important to understand that every time a crisis hits, you do, as a business, have the opportunity to take stock, to reset, and to actually change much, much faster than you would without that crisis. Don't let that opportunity go to waste, because that, I think, at the end of the day, is what will serve you well in terms of resilience, in terms of you getting back to either normal or even better than normal, is making sure that you make the most out of this for driving the changes that you and your organization need to not just to survive, but to succeed in whatever that new normal is.
Cabby, as always, I mean, you bring knowledge, but you also bring wisdom, and there's not enough of that these days. So we're very, very grateful to have you here. Encourage the rest of you who are with us and watching to reach out to Cabby. Easy to find on LinkedIn. I think Eric, you threw his LinkedIn link in the chat as well.
Thank you, Eric.
He is an individual of integrity and quality worth knowing. He's a thoughtful contributor, someone I'm pleased to call a friend as well. So, Cabby, thanks so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor, and thank you, everyone.
So let me just wrap up with an encouragement to all of you to don't stall out in this process of recovery. This is a moment to continue, but also you don't have to do it alone. We can do this together. You got a group of people on this call. So if you want to reach out to a Rhapsody coach, we've said absolutely. If you're not working with one already, do it. We'll spend some time with you on us. No problem, no pressure. This is the moment to have those conversations, to get things right, and also one another. There's a community forming here of people who are focused on this, and we don't do this alone. We do this together. So I encourage you to do that. Cabby, again, thank you. Everyone who's joined us, thank you for your thoughtfulness, your questions, and your insights. Stay tuned for the sessions that are coming up. I think they'll be very, very useful for you as well. And again, we're wishing all our best to each and every one of you. Thanks, everyone.